I had been planning to make a video about Filmhub and comparing it to another aggregator called Bitmax, and how they both differ and how they're both the same, which works better depending on your project. I have used both. I use Filmhub currently, and I use Bitmax currently for my most recent project called Casey Makes a Mixtape. Check the description of this video about that movie. It's out right now on Amazon, Apple TV, Fandango at Home, Google Play, and YouTube Movies. And I've had a good experience with Bitmax, but one reason I'm pivoting my video today, Filmhub just announced some big changes that have a lot of people in a big uproar. So real quickly, if you don't know, Filmhub and Bitmax are aggregators, and that way they can take your movie and bypass distributors, and go directly to the platforms for you. So they essentially are acting like distributors, but really they're more of just a conduit to get you on the various platforms like Amazon, etc. And they take a variety of fees depending on the services you're using. And a lot of indie filmmakers today use Filmhub in particular because it's been mainly a free service. Now they have paid tiers, but their free plan, the core plan, has been what most people use. And now that is changing. It's some pretty big changes. The number one thing is you now don't get any kind of customer support with the basic plan. And number two, you don't get free QC. Well, you do if it's standard. This is where it gets a little confusing. But if it's premium QC, which is what you want, because that goes out to the bigger and better channels, it costs money now, which is fine, truth be told. Used to, it never cost, but now it's $500, I believe, or in that range for core members. If you get a paid tier, you get 1 or 2 a year, depending on which plan you're in. But the paid tier is $1,000. It's $1,000 a year for the plus plan. And then I think it's $2,000 a year for the pro plan. Now, if you have a lot of films, you're doing distribution for a living, paying is not a big deal. But for most people on Filmhub, and this is where the big problem arises, they're doing one-off movies, or if they have multiple movies, they're all very small. When I say small, I don't mean micro budget like what I'm used to doing, which is $100,000 or $200,000. I mean micro budget like $5,000. Nothing wrong with those kind of movies. It's just that from a aggregator or distributor point of view, you're not going to make much money on those. And so ultimately what I think this new plan is about is weeding those people out. Meaning if you're not willing to spend $500 to get your film QC'd, then you're not really pursuing it as a professional occupation. And that's totally fine. One of the larger arguments I've heard, a lot of the movies that Filmhub takes really shouldn't be out in the world. They just shouldn't. Back when I began, we would enter a film festival, and your film might go to a festival and then eventually might end up on YouTube, but we never got really professional distribution. Now, there are exceptions, of course. Small budget movies, $7,000, $5,000 movies absolutely can do well and get out into the world. But typically speaking, they are not good. And that's the bigger point here, is Filmhub is not making enough money on the volume. That is their business model, by the way. At least that's my perception of it. They take every movie, there's no curation, and they get 20% of everything a movie makes. Well, a lot of these movies are making zero. I'll routinely see people post on Facebook that they've made like $100. And so if you make $100, Filmhub's made 20. And so you've made 80 or whatever it may be. And in their email they sent out, they mentioned that if your movie doesn't make over $20,000 a year, that you don't get certain benefits. And that's totally understandable. The problem with Filmhub, and it's always been their problem, is they're absolutely horrible with communication. I don't really understand why. They are a tech-savvy company, and I'm just guessing that they're more tech-savvy people, and they're not very customer service-driven. The idea that you went from being free to paying for a lot of people to get the same stuff is not good. And I forgot to mention, the bigger one is we now don't have access to the performance panel, which if you've been on Filmhub, you know what that is. If you don't, basically you can see how your movie's done, where it is. Now, we do get very general numbers, and it only goes back 6 months now. And that's one thing I do not like. The idea that you can't see what your movie's done all the time without paying is just really not a good idea. That's dumb. Let's just be frank. Even if we have a free account, the ability to see what your movie's made over the lifetime of it is important, especially if you have investors, even if it's a small amount of money. Now, evidently, you can go back and look at the statements and get information that way, but it seems like kind of a hassle. You should be able to just go right to the data. Now, a lot of people are upset because they've taken away the Amazon data. The Amazon insights that were part of the performance are now only in paid accounts. And I had never actually looked at those myself. I should say my titles are library titles. They're older movies, and I've just put them in there to get them out on Tubi, etc. If I was doing a new title, I would want access to it. And that's what I did with Bitmax. And Bitmax has their own pay panel, and you get the numbers there. It's not super detailed, but it's good. Bitmax, you have to pay up front to use their services, but in the end, it may be better because you pay once and you're done, and then they don't take any kind of fee. I'm going into my comparison video here, but I don't want to do that right now. I really want to concentrate on Filmhub because I can see why people are upset, but I also see how Filmhub is running a business and they have to be profitable. And having all these micro budget movies on there, which was their business model, by the way, that aren't making any money is not working for them because then you still have to give all those people customer support. It's just tying up all their resources, I can imagine. Although I will say I've been with Filmhub, I think, for 3 years and I've never contacted customer support. So when people say they need help, I'm like, for what? I guess it's more than likely it's beginners, newbies, don't understand the captions or the artwork. And that's fine. But in the end, really, and that's kind of the bigger point, professional distribution may not be what they need. They need to learn and go and do film festivals and such and not be putting their movie out into the world. That's just the hard truth. I have several movies from the beginning of my career that aren't anywhere. I'm not trying to diss any other filmmakers or anything. It's just the truth, especially when you're just starting out. Again, art is subjective, but when you have bad sound, bad lighting and all that, just the basic objective stuff that's poor, you're not going to get picked up by any platforms anyway. So ultimately, I think Filmhub is terrible at communication. I really wish they would get better at that. I think it's ridiculous and stupid that they pulled away the ability for us to see our total amount we've made. Right now, you can only see 6 months, but you should be able to get an aggregate of what you've made and not have to pay $1,000 a year. Charging for QC is totally fine. I get it. Most places charge $1,000 to $1,500, so $500 is actually a good deal. And then finally, I just want to mention Relay. Relay is Filmhub's subscription streaming service. And to me, that's something else that's going on. It's a little bit cool, but also a little bit weird. And I get why they did it. I assume they're taking the 20,000 or so films they have and putting them on there. And it makes sense to do that because that's a lot of movies. You can get people to subscribe and you have another revenue stream. But number one, that's a really hard proposition in today's day and age. There's too many streaming services. Number two, you're talking about mainly movies that no one's ever heard of. And there's always been talk about it would be really cool to have a Netflix for indie films. And I think that's kind of what they're doing. So I do like the premise. It's only $5 a month and you get to watch whatever you want. But I think right now it's mainly the filmmakers on Filmhub that are subscribing and it's brand new. And so time will tell, but I don't know if a venture like that is going to widen out into the general population. It's a tough sell. And so they've got that going and they're pushing films to Relay, which is great. And I mentioned earlier, they are beginning to do some traditional distribution as well as just being an aggregator or a distribution service. But you do kind of have to wonder how much Relay is playing into that, meaning, are they just taking on films to build their library? I know a lot of distributors do that. And now, because they've got their library built up, they're sort of turning their backs on those films and those filmmakers. And again, a lot of people have done that. I mean, Amazon did it. Hell, Netflix did it. Tubi kind of did it. And so maybe Filmhub is doing that a little bit now. And so I think they're trying to weed those people out. A race to the bottom is not good. And so sometimes you'll win. So I think that's what's going on with Filmhub. I'm not super worried about it because, again, I'm not going to pay right now. And for just putting movies out on Tubi, etc., I don't think you really need to have a paid account. You don't really need those analytics. You really don't, those insights. I get why some people want them because they're doing marketing. They want to see how they're working. But in the end, if you went with a traditional distributor, you would get your quarterly report and you would have no information. So even though Filmhub has restricted some of what they're doing, it's still considerably, and I mean considerably better than traditional distributors, the way they work, as far as getting information quickly. Maybe in a quarterly report, you get some more detail, but typically you don't. They're very vague. Last point I want to make is a lot of the people that are complaining about Filmhub have obviously never had traditional distribution or never worked with a traditional distributor. So they have nothing else to compare it to. So yeah, Filmhub has kind of spoiled them, but in the end, they're getting a reality check now. Filmhub, in the scheme of things, is still very affordable. It's free for most people, and you can get your film out to the world and on Tubi if you have a good film and if you really want to approach it in a professional manner. And I am going to do that video comparing Bitmax and Filmhub, so look for that one in the future. Later.